In 1095, Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade to reclaim the Holy City of Jerusalem from Muslim control. By October 1097, the Crusaders had reached the city of Antioch in the province of Syria. Antioch was a strategically vital city for the Seljuk Empire, as it blocked the route onward to Jerusalem. Situated on the banks of the Orontes River to the west, its eastern side was defended by towering mountains. These natural defences made the task of taking the city by force incredibly difficult, so the Crusades' leaders opted for a siege of attrition. This strategy had its flaws. The city's immense defensive walls, stretching for approximately 8 miles, made the task a formidable one. Furthermore, the city boasted a 5,000-strong garrison, plentiful food stores, and a ready water supply. By 1098, the Crusaders, who had spent 8 months besieging the city, found themselves trapped within its walls. A massive Seljuk army, led by the renowned warrior Kerberga, arrived to reclaim the city. His forces first massacred the Norman knight Roger of Barneville, in full view of the Crusaders, who were now almost horseless and low on supplies. Deciding they were in no position to launch a full-scale attack, many fled the city in stealth, fearing there was no hope of victory. They were all slaughtered. The remaining Crusaders, led by Bohemond of Taranto, Robert of Flanders, Robert of Normandy, and Godfrey of Bouillon, survived through sheer determination and martial skill. On the 28th of June, Bohemond led the Crusaders out of the city to confront Kerberga's army head-on. The Crusaders, divided into 6 divisions, began to fight Kerberga's men, who were widely dispersed around the city walls. Although depleted, the Crusaders were bonded together by a common belief. Kerberga's massive army, however, was not, and certain factions planned to desert him at the first sign of defeat. Caught slightly off guard by the size of the crusading force, Kerberga ordered his men to fall back, intending to lure the Christians onto uneven ground. Bohemond, however, had anticipated this move and created a 7th division, led by Reinald of Toul, to act as a rearguard. So ferocious was Reinald's attack that his opponents fled the field. At the front, the Crusader formation held strong against the Muslim onslaught. Sensing defeat, Kerberga's men began to desert him. The Crusaders chased the deserters, slaying them before they could reach safety. With Kerberga's main camp overrun and ravaged by the Crusaders, he too accepted defeat. The Battle of Antioch was the most significant military engagement of the First Crusade. Through determination and skill, the Crusaders were able to overpower the Seljuk forces and capture the highly contested city of Antioch, a crucial victory that would pave the way for their advance to Jerusalem. Few battles of the Middle Ages are as well known as the Battle of Hastings. On the 14th of October 1066, it became the decisive victory for William of Normandy in his conquest of England, bringing an end to centuries of Saxon rule and inaugurating a new age of Norman monarchy. It was a day England would never forget. Edward the Confessor died in January 1066 without officially naming an heir. The following day, the West Saxon Harold Godwinson was crowned King of England. Hearing this, William of Normandy, who believed he had been promised the throne by Edward, readied his warships for the journey across the English Channel. It would be 7 months, however, before William and his fleet finally set foot on English shores. By early September, a new claimant had already arrived in England. Harold Hardrada led his army forcefully through the country, culminating in the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September the 25th, where Godwinson defeated Hardrada in a fierce battle. 3 days later, William of Normandy and his troops landed in England. He led his men and established a camp near Hastings, causing havoc in the surrounding villages. When news of this reached Harold, he decided not to wait. Fresh from his recent victory, he led his men to Hastings to meet William in battle. On the morning of October the 14th, trumpets sounded and battle began. Harold had tried to spring a surprise on William, but Norman spies had already seen the English army and the Normans had ridden out to battle in response. The English army was composed mainly of infantry and very few archers. The Normans, by contrast, had an army that was roughly half infantry, with the other half composed of equal numbers of cavalry and archers. Early attempts by the Normans to break the English battle line were futile, so they resorted to an unorthodox tactic. William ordered his men to feign a panicked retreat from the battlefield. As they prepared to run away, the English, breaking from their shield wall, pursued them. The Normans then turned back and attacked, taking Harold's army by surprise. As dusk began to settle over the battlefield, William knew he could not afford to let the fighting spill over into a second day, and ordered his forces to advance on Harold. Sources are conflicting on what happened next. The Bayeux tapestry shows Harold being killed by an arrow to the eye, though it may also depict him being cut down by a man on a horse. The poem Carmen, the earliest source for the battle, says it was William himself who killed the English king, along with a cohort of his men who hacked Harold down, beheaded and disemboweled him before carrying his entrails in a victory procession. Which of these stories is true remains open to debate. The fact remains, however, that Harold was dead and William and the Normans had won. William was crowned King of England, ending Saxon rule and ushering in a new age of monarchy in England. William later founded a monastery at the site of the battle, and the high altar of the Abbey Church was supposedly placed at the exact spot where Harold was killed. The Battle of Bannockburn was a pivotal engagement in the First War of Scottish Independence. Fought in June 1314 between the armies of Robert the Bruce, King of the Scots, and Edward II of England, it is considered a major turning point in the war and one of Scotland's greatest military victories. The conflict centred on Stirling Castle, which had been held by the English since its capture by Edward I in 1296. When Robert's brother, Edward Bruce, laid siege to the castle, Edward II could not afford to lose it, as it provided access to the Scottish lands his father had conquered. In response, Edward mustered the largest invading force Scotland had ever seen, with approximately 18,000 infantry and 12,000 cavalry. Robert the Bruce's army, by contrast, numbered only 6,000 men. On the morning of the 23rd of June, the two armies were less than 10 miles apart, and a coin toss seemed to be the only thing that would decide where the battle would begin that day. Edward had marched his army over 70 miles in the previous week in an attempt to hasten their approach to Stirling Castle. This strenuous march considerably weakened his men and horses, a factor that would prove to be decisive. When fighting began, Edward's army found themselves blocked by Robert's forces, which were separated into 4 divisions of schiltrons, a compact body of soldiers or a shield wall. Many of these men had travelled from all over Scotland and the Isles, including a number of Gallo-class warriors who had joined the fight. The first day of battle showcased Robert the Bruce's leadership. He fought from the front and engaged in single combat with the English knight Henry de Bohun, defeating him with a blow from an axe to the head. Bolstered by this act, the Scots faced the oncoming English vanguard. The English were quickly routed by the spears of the Scots and were forced to retreat. Many English knights were captured at Stirling Castle, an ominous start to the battle for the English. The following morning, Gilbert, Earl of Gloucester, led the English vanguard in a charge on the Scottish cavalry, in the hope of improving his country's fortunes. However, he was quickly surrounded and killed. A bloody slaughter followed. King Edward, now horseless but bravely fighting on, had to be forcefully dragged from the battlefield by the Earl of Pembroke and the famous knight
Sir Gilles de Argentan.
Shortly after delivering the king to safety,
De Argentan
was himself hacked down by the Scots. Edward escaped Bannockburn with only 500 men. Hundreds of the most established knights of his realm had been killed in battle, with thousands more men left behind to suffer the same fate. Not only this, but many high-ranking nobles were taken prisoner, and Edward's Privy Seal was captured. The Battle of Bannockburn was a catastrophe for Edward II, but for Robert the Bruce, it completely legitimised his place on the throne of Scotland, making him stronger and more powerful than he had ever been.